Greetings hobbyists, this is Arsans and in this tutorial we're going to be having a look at how to use geometry nodes to scatter objects over a collection of faces. And in this example we're going to be using it to make a pile of treasure, though we will have a look at some other things that we can do with this as well. Now the first thing we're going to need is something to be our pile of treasure or our basis for this, so we're going to start by just Ctrl + A and bring in a plane. I want this to be a decent size. I generally use my Blender units, which comes up as meters to represent millimeters. So I want to make this larger than this. I'm going to set this to somewhere in the region of 30. So we've got a nice big plane here that we can use. Obviously you could do this bigger. I'm going to have to make this a bit more of an interesting shape. So let's start with that, and we're going to do the easiest thing, which is to just subdivide this up. Now at this point I don't want to make this geometry too complex, so we're not going to subdivide it too much, but I am going to go into this. So tab into edge mode, press A to make sure all the edges are selected, right click, and I'm going to click subdivide, and I probably want this cut up somewhere in the region of, I don't know, if we do it 10 times, they're 3mm each, that should be fine. Then I'm going to tab into vertex mode, and I'm going to select a couple of these vertices, and I'm actually just going to click the middle 4 at this point, and I'm going to come up here and make sure my proportional editing is on, and then I can press G and Z to bring this up, and if I use my mouse wheel I can make this bigger, so I can make this pile. And I'm going to keep the edges relatively flat, so something about that should be fine. And I'm going to select one of these other ones, and again G and Z, making it a bit smaller this time, just so we've got a little bit of interest in terms of the shape. It's not just a hill. And I might do this over here as well. So that'll do for now, and obviously this is only for demonstration purposes, so we're going to tab out of that. Now in the channel we have had a look at how to scatter objects on faces before or on a surface, and we did that using the scatter object tool. And you can access that video in the top right hand corner link, or there is a link in the description, but that did have some problems with it. And I say problems, more limitations, in that you can only do that with one object at a time. Now what's going to be really useful about using geometry nodes is that fantastically we can scatter more than one object onto this surface, which is obviously a real benefit. Now the scatter tool does have some benefits to it itself. It's a little bit easier to place the different objects, but again there's other positives and negatives. For example, the scatter tool, when we use it, can cause a lot of overlap of objects, whereas we can do quite a lot to control the overlap of objects. So let's make our objects that we're going to scatter on it. Now, being that this is going to be a pile of treasure, I'm just going to create a few simple things that can act as treasure. So I'm just going to Shift and A, bring in a cylinder, and so this doesn't get too complex, I'm going to bring that down from 36 vertices to 16, because we're going to be making multiple instances of this, so we don't want too much geometry. I want the radius to be 1, so that's going to give it a total of 2mm, so it should be visible, and I want the depth to, let's say, be 1. And I'm going to G and Y, and bring that over to the side here, and let's rename that. In fact, let's make that a little bit wider. So I'm going to press the M panel and change that to 3. So we've got 3mm coins. Those are fine. Then I'm going to press F2 and I'm going to rename this as coin, just so that it's easy to find when I need it. And let's bring in something else as well. Let's have something like a gemstone. So Shift and A again. I'm going to come down, and if you scroll down here, there is a thing called diamonds. Now if you don't have that, just go to Edit and Preferences, and if you type in Extra, you will have this extra objects for mesh and curves. You want the one for mesh, so make sure that's ticked on, and then save that if you don't have autosave preferences on. So Shift and A, mesh, and we're going to bring in a diamond, and we just want a gem. G and Y to move that over, and the one thing that we do want to do is make sure that these are relatively similar sizes. So I'm going to bring that up to about there, and that will work better with this using these geonodes. I'm going to talk about these limitations as we go through, so you'll understand why I'm doing this as the same size, and you can have a look at, is this going to really matter for you? So that's automatically going to be named gem. I'm going to keep that, but I'm going to select both of them, press Ctrl A, and I'm going to apply the scale, because obviously we've scaled things up. So let's keep that like that at this point. In fact, actually, I'm just going to make a really simple cup as well. So I'm just creating the cross section from a single vertex that I'm extruding out, and then I'm going to use the screw modifier to create this overall shape. Okay, so I've got this here as well, and I thought it would be worth bringing that in just because it's a bit bigger and it might demonstrate this problem quite well. In fact, actually, I'm going to make that a bit more realistic in size, so somewhere about there. And then again, Ctrl and A, apply the scale, and let's rename that. So F2, and we're going to call that cup. So let's get going with these geonodes. Now, before I do that, looking at this, I think I want this to be a bit bigger actually. It's looking like it'd be a pretty meager pile of treasure. So let's just put that somewhere like that so it's a little bit bigger. Again, Control and A and apply the scale. It's always something we can fiddle around with later, but I do want this to look like an impressive pile of treasure. And just because we've scaled that up so much, I am just going to subdivide this one more time. And I'm just using a subdivision surface modifier for that. And importantly, it's going to be simple, so we've still got the edges looking a little bit more sharp. So let's get going with the geometry nodes. The first thing I need to do is get somewhere to do the geometry nodes. So I'm going to go down to here and move this up. So I've got it split about 50-50. And then I need to come here and change this view window from being the timeline to being the geometry node editor. So I've got that here now. In fact, I might make that a little bit bigger so it's really clear to see. And we need to select the object that we want to put the geometry nodes onto, and I'm just going to click new and zoom into where we've got this geometry in to geometry out. So this works effectively by just putting a lot of points onto these faces and then instancing these objects to those points. And it's just nice to be able to do it really quickly without having to add lots of different modifiers or go through lots of different menus to do this. If you haven't used geometry nodes before, we have used them previously. I've done a tutorial on how we can use them to make wear and tear on bricks. Again, there's a link in the top right hand corner and in the description. To add in a geometry node, all we do is press Shift and A just like we would do to add in an object. We've got this huge menu here. I generally find it easy just to click on the search and type in what I want. So for this, I want to put in a points on faces node. So we've got here distribute points on faces. I'm going to click that, put it to here. And we've got all of these points automatically being put onto our faces. Now at this point, this is really dense. We're going to worry about that in a little bit, but this quite clearly wouldn't work because what's going to happen is each one of these dots, each one of these points is going to end up having one of our objects on it. The other thing we'll notice is that we've lost our surface, and being that this pile of treasure is not going to be all made up of coins, we're going to want something underneath it, especially for 3D printing to make this a solid object. So we're going to need that there. So all we're going to have to do is tell the geometry nodes that we want something from our original input coming to our output. So I'm going to press Shift and A again, and I'm going to type in join, and we want the join geometry nodes. I'm going to put that there, and I can just drag my original geometry to there. And now we've got my original geometry at the end being joined to our points and what's going to eventually be put on them. Now this density is really quite high. It's not going to be a problem because we're going to do something about it, but at this point this is going to cause, when we start setting it up, quite a bit of lag. So I'm just going to change that down to 1 so we've got less of these points so my computer doesn't have a heart attack halfway through. So we're going to put what we'd call an instance of each of these objects onto one of our points, and again there's just a simple node for that. Shift and A, and I just want instance on points. So not instance to points, importantly, instance on points. And I'm going to put that in there to say that we're doing this with each of our points. And you'll notice all of my points have just disappeared now because I haven't told it to put anything on here. So we're going to start with the most simple version of this. And that is we're just going to use this coin. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about everything else later, but I thought we'd start simple. And all we do is we want to have an object info node. And that essentially tells Blender to go and find an object that we're going to select here and then use it. So I can either do this by bringing it in, using the drop menu, or clicking here and picking my thing. The other thing that I can do, I'm just going to delete that, is that actually they've made it nice and easy. So if I want this coin, I can just come up to my outliner tab, grab the one that I want, which is the coin, and drag it over into my geometry nodes, and that will bring in an object info node, and it's already got the coin on there. So I want the geometry of this going to my instance, and you'll notice suddenly there's many coins. Now I haven't actually tried this, but I get the feeling that this is probably not going to work if I tried to bring this in, because from a 3D printing standpoint I could bring this density down, something like that, but we've got this big problem, they're all overlapping. Now if you're going to be at a distance, this might not be a problem and you might be fine with that. If so, the rest of this isn't really too needed, but it is a bit of something that I don't really like, so we're going to deal with that by making it so they don't overlap. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having the distribution of my points being random, I'm going to come down here to this Poisson disk, and what that's going to do, you'll notice that at the moment this has got even worse. That's because at the moment it's got a minimum distance of 0, and what I can do is I can move this up so that now I'm controlling the distance between each of my points. And if I go to the point where it's about 3, there's not going to be any overlap because my object is 3 in width. Now there are some gaps between this, which might be a problem. We're going to have a look at that later. It sort of depends on what you're doing, but I think when actually we get to the point where this is all joined together and it is all been painted, I don't think that'd be too much of an issue. But as I said, I'm going to come up with a solution to that later, which for me, I think works. If you'd rather, you could have them overlapping. That's entirely up to you. Now, this is looking a little bit boring at this point because, well, they're all just flat and that doesn't look like a really big pile of treasure to me where everything's just been dumped on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make it so that this is a bit more random in its orientation. You'll notice on the instance to points geometry node, we've got this option for rotation here. So we're just going to use that. And if I press Shift and A, I'm just going to bring in a random value node, which is just going to come in here, and it comes in automatically as a float. We don't want that. We want this as a vector so that I've got some minimum and maximums of my X and Y's. And you'll notice while these aren't labels, top one's X, Y, and Z. At the moment we've got a minimum of 0, saying there's going to be no rotation on these, and then a maximum of 1, which is, well, full rotation effectively. It's not done in degrees. So if I put that there, you'll notice suddenly I've got a lot of randomly rotated coins. Great, that's exactly what I want at this point. Now you'll notice this does bring some points where they get very close to each other here, but that should be okay. If you're a little worried about that, you might want to just put that to 3.1 and that should fix that issue. And if you don't mind the overlap, we could just do that a little bit higher, and again it's going to look a lot more dense, a lot more like a pile of treasure, but there is going to be these overlaps here. We're just going to have to bear that in mind. If you can accept that, that's fine. It does probably look a bit better this way, especially at a distance. That's entirely up to you. I'm going to put that back to my 3.1 and I'm going to talk about an alternative solution later. It's up to you what you use out of these solutions. So where do we want to go to next? Well, at the moment, I promised that we were going to have a wide range of objects on here, and at the moment, we've only got the coins. So let's have a look at how we can do this, because it's probably the most important bit of it. There is one other bit for 3D printing I'm going to really highlight later, but this is the first one. So the first thing we want to do is make a collection. So if I come up here, right click, and then new collection, I'm going to call this treasure. And then once we've done that, all we need to do is select our coin and our gem, M, and move it to our collection, which is treasure. Now at this point, you'll notice the geometry nodes have disappeared. All we need to do is click back on that and it's back there. And I'm going to delete this object info. We don't want this. And we're going to bring in a collection info instead. And Shift and A, I could type in collection and we've got the collection info there. Or I could just click on treasure, drag it in, and it's all sorted for me. And again, geometry to instance. And we've got this going on. Now you'll notice this has got some problems of where it is. And that is because we need to click these two buttons at the bottom. And you'll also notice another problem that we've got in that each of our points has got a gem on top of a coin. And to fix that, all we need to do is select this pick instance button and it randomly selects one of our instances. And now I've got this nice pile of coins and gems. Now what's great about this, or I really like about it, is that at this point, it's selecting them at random, and being that there's one coin and one gem, it's going to have about a 50-50 mix. Now for me, I like my treasure to be mostly gold coins. I don't want a lot of gems, especially from a painting point of view. That's going to be a mare to start picking them out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my coin, and I'm just going to press Shift and D to duplicate it, and then I'm going to press X just to move it along a little bit there. And now I've got 2 coins. You'll notice that it automatically keeps it in the same collection as the original one. So I've now got twice as many coins as my gems. And if I just press Shift and R to repeat, that's going to make another copy, and another copy, another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and one more. And at this point, I've got my original one and 9 more. So what I've got here is for every 1 gem, I've got about 10 coins. Now I do wish that there was a way to do this within the node setup. I was trying to find a way of duplicating these objects just in the nodes, and at the moment there isn't really a way of doing that. Now to be clear, I'm using Blender 3.1 and they're really working on these nodes, so I would expect something potentially to be added in. If I'm missing something here, please do let me know. I'm just learning geometry nodes. I said that in my last geometry nodes video, and I'm really happy and would appreciate any additional information that people have if I'm doing this in a really silly way. So at this point, we've got our coins, we've got our gems. I'm going to quickly demonstrate what's going to happen with this cup. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this cup and I'm going to press M and move it to the treasure collection. And you'll notice that this causes some hassle straight away. Now, the first one is that you'll notice a lot of them are just sticking out in weird places. For example, this one. Now, the reason for that is that these instances are created off of where the origin is. So the first thing we'd want to do if we are going to fix this is to move this origin. So I'm going to click on the object, come to this option menu over here, and I can set my transform to just affect the origins. And if I do, press G and Z and move my origin up to somewhere more central, like there, you'll notice that suddenly my cups are in much better places. Do always remember to go back and unselect that so you've got this here. But the biggest problem is that you've got these cups now and they are really likely to overlap other objects. This is a current limitation with geometry nodes. Again, I'd love it if they fix this. Don't know if they're going to, but this way of distributing faces on points, if I zoom in, is all about these discs. And what that does is it's just measuring 3 of our Blender units. In this instance, it says meters, we're using it as millimeters, from each point that we saw to begin with, each of the dots that was on here. And there's going to be that gap between them, or it's going to effectively make a gap around that of 3.1 meters, and then every other point has a gap of 3.1 meters and they can't overlap. So that's what's doing this, but obviously these cups are bigger, so they're going to overlap. So we could put this as a larger amount, which means that now the cups aren't going to overlap, but then all of the other ones are sort of sitting in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't really work. So I'm going to put that as 3.1, and I'm going to just get my cup and I'm just going to press M and I'm going to move it back to the normal collection. And interestingly, it's got a little confused by that. It's left them there. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of that treasure, click on treasure again, and that solves that. It's an interesting one. Hadn't noticed that before, but either way, easy to solve. Move it and then just get rid of the treasure and open it again. So all this means is that really I'm just going to have to bring those in and add them to it, and I probably wouldn't want a lot of these cups anyway, so it's not too big a deal. But it would be really nice if instead of having this Poisson disc, it had some other way of, for each point, working out the size of the disc. Now we do have something coming in here, and I don't know if you would be able to use that to make it measure the size of this object for each instance and then space it out by that, so that it's doing for each one. Don't know. If you could, that'd be really cool, but I'm not too sure about that yet. Something I need to play around with. Now, geometry nodes do get a little bit messy at points, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of those nodes that are to do with this. I'm going to press Ctrl and J, and it's going to join them together into one big, nice, happy thing that's easy to deal with, and I can move it around more easily. It's nice and easy, and I'm going to press F2, and I can even name that as instancing, or whatever else I want, and it comes to the top. So at this point, this is great. I mean, I've got what I want, I've got my pile of treasure, and we can do what we want with it. Now, I'm going to deal with one problem straight away, which is these little bits. The ones hanging off the edge that we probably don't want so much. And there is a way of dealing with this that's quite a useful one to do, and I do quite like it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move out of my geometry nodes so we can see this, and I'm going to come into vertex mode for this object. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all my vertices except for the ones on the outside. And I'm going to turn this into a vertex group. And vertex groups are things Blender uses to be able to say, well, I only want you to do things to specific points within an object instead of the whole object. So if I come down here to Object Data Properties, here we've got this option for vertex group, and all I'm going to do is press plus, and I'm going to name this something like instance groups. Hit enter. Now, this is a really important bit with vertex groups. At this point, it hasn't actually said that this is a vertex group. It doesn't know that I've done this yet. You've got to click assign with these vertices selected for that to happen. And now if I click off of it, you can always test if it works by pressing select, and then suddenly they'll appear. So that tells you you've done this right. And again, you can deselect them, select them, whatever. It's quite a useful way of being able to select things quickly as well if you're going to edit things later. So I'm going to come back round to here. Let's bring up my geometry nodes again, and I'm going to ask it to only do it on these points, or on the faces coming off of this point. Now, interestingly, actually, let's just come back in. This will still put some of these coins on the faces here, because essentially this vertex is connected to those faces, so it will almost like half use them. It's a bit like weight painting, which is another thing you can do with this, but I've got to tell it that we want to do this, and we've got this selection option. Now this is a little bit hidden, so what we're going to do here is we're going to move from this to the selection. So we've got this blank empty one here that now has got nothing by it, and what that's going to do is it's going to say that we want a selection, and over here I've got this option called groups, and then I get this information about it. And if I click on selection, you can see what I've got here. And if I go to the modifier properties, you can see that I've got this bit that says selection. And what I can do is I can rename this. So I'm going to name this vertex group, just so it's really obvious. And here, if I just click on this box there to delete everything and then select there, I have all these options, and one of them is instance groups, which is what I named my vertex group. So whatever I named it here, that would have come back up. Again, if I just stop that and I call this, I don't know, fish, and come back here, click on there, it's now called fish, whatever. It doesn't matter what it's called. But what that does is fairly reliably stop this overhang. Now you do get one or two, for example, this one's being a pain, and you've got, I think, another one I saw just there. And if you do want to fiddle around with this until it's not happening, what you can just do is move here, click seed, move it along, and it will re-randomize everything until you get one that you're happy with. So for example, that one's pretty good, little overhang there. Whatever. So you can play around with this and these seeds until you find one that's really good and doesn't have too many of these overhangs. But beforehand, we were getting a lot of these overhangs, and when we were booleaning things together later or joining everything together, that would cause a problem. So I'm just going to go back to this one. That one looks fairly okay. So that's a really good tool to use. In fact, that one that we found earlier, that one there, was a little bit better. So this is just a good way of you controlling where these instances are going on. And I'd really recommend that. But again, totally up to you. I just think some computers are going to find problems with this. And later on, I can actually just delete these out. I'll talk about that when we get to it. So at this point, we've got our instances on our faces, and it's all looking pretty good. It looks like a nice pile of treasure, and we've got our options. If I do want to have more of them in there with them overlapping, I can do that. But what's good about this is we can really quickly and easily do this with other things. So if I press Shift and D and just move this along here, and we've got the same sort of stuff going on, you'll notice it's copied the geometry nodes. But if I bring something else in, for example, if I minimize these, bring in a new collection, and I'm going to call this skulls. And if I've got this selected, anything I bring in is going to be on here. You'll notice this usefully tells us how many is in the collection as well, which is quite nice. So File, Import, STLs. I'm going to find where I've found these skulls. I think those two are okay. I'm going to import that, and I've got these, they're rather large. Let's G and Y that a little bit more. But I just found a couple of low poly skulls. I'm just going to shrink those down to about the same size, and Control and A, apply the scale. So we've got these relatively low poly skulls, and if I just come over here and change this collection info from treasure to skulls, we're going to have a load of skulls, which is cool. I mean, this minimum distance is probably a little bit small, so let's move those around. And this one is obviously really too small, so actually let's S to bring that a little bit bigger. And we've got some skulls. Let's have a look at where these are. That's going to be a problem. So if I have a look at each of these, you'll notice we've got the origin here, and this one's the origin there, so that's not going to work well. So Shift and S and move the origin to the geometry, and then Shift and S and move the origin to the geometry. In fact, I don't like that. I probably want it in the middle. So again, origins, G, put that somewhere there. Where's this one? G, put that somewhere there. And that will move these so they're a little bit more well placed. And obviously we can do this with as many as we want. They've been randomly placed, so they're in different orientations. And obviously if you're doing something for, let's say, a Games Workshop game where every single bit of terrain has to have at least 58 skulls on it, this would work quite well. So you can do this with other things, and it's going to make some objects really nice, quickly and easily. And you can obviously control how many you're going to have, and so on. Interestingly, you will notice that actually this has affected both of them because we're still using the same geometry node. What you need to do is to have this just affecting one, I should have said this earlier, we should have clicked that first. So if I just select that, you'll notice that now that's there, this one's back here, and I'm going to have to come back in and select treasure for that and change this to 3.1. Should have realized that straight away, my apologies. So when that has a number 2, it means that more than one is sharing the same geometry node, and it will be doing, or anything you affect on one will affect the other. So probably a good learning point there. Right, let's get rid of those, and let's get back to my treasure. So at this point, this is looking pretty hot, and if this is all you want, I'm just going to make that geometry node nice and big there for you to have a look at it. Feel free to pause it and copy to your heart's content. But as I said, I'm not too keen on this idea that everything's really flat. I want this to look like it's a little bit more textured. That way, even though there's nothing there, it might look like little bits of gold, like little nuggets that have been dug out of the ground and just put into this hoard, or it might be mistaken for other coins, or just something that at a distance is going to look a little bit better and a little bit more textured. So we're going to do that in our geometry nodes, and we can do that because we've got this line up here that's coming off, so we can affect it, so why not? So let's start by breaking this up a little bit. Now at the moment, if I just go into my Z, I can have a look at this. I know that each one of these lines there is a millimeter, because that's the way Blender works on units, or at least it's down as a meter. And I'm going to break this up a little bit more. Now, I don't want this to get too much. The geometry for this could get really over the top. Just realized I've left that on, really bad form for there. So we're going to break this up, and I've got, well, each one of these squares there probably needs to be broken down once and then once again. That's going to equal faces of about 1.5 millimeters. So let's Shift and A, bring the subdivision surface, select it there, and I want this to have 2 levels, and I want to have a crease of 1. Let's just come back out here to one of these corners. If I have this crease as 0, you'll see it starts deforming the edge. I don't want that. I just want to have a nice clear edge there. So I'm going to have the crease as 1 for something that we're going to do later to be able to make this 3D printable. Now you'll notice this isn't affecting the coins because very clearly we've set this as a separate path. So this isn't making more coins or doing anything like that. Now, what we've got here is this face being broken up a number of times. You can start to see each of these individual squares, and we can use this to start making some texture where I can tell this geometry node to move each of these points about a bit. So if I press Shift and A, I can bring in a set position. I always remember this wrong. I don't know why. I always think of this as an offset one. I can't remember if that was one of the old names of the nodes, but either way, what this is doing is it's going to offset each of these points by an amount. And it does this individually for each point. For example, I could press S and slide it along a bit, and at the moment, each of these points has individually been moved up 2.3 meters. But because every single one of the points has been moved up 2.3 meters, it looks like the whole thing has. I'm going to set that back to 0. But what we can do is set that to move a random amount. And we can use exactly the same things we used over here. We can just bring in a random value. So Shift A, random again, bring that in here, and again, I don't want this to be a float. It's going to have to move as if it's a vector, so bring in vector, and let's put that value into the offset. And now at the moment, it's moving everything around because it's got 1 for this maximum for the X, Y, and Z. And to be honest, that's probably not really needed. It's gonna potentially cause more problems than I want with things overlapping. So I'm gonna put each one of those to 0, except for the Z. That's the only one that we need moving up and down. And you can see we've now suddenly got a lot more texture to this. It's looking a lot better. I might increase this slightly. I don't want this going too high. For example, if I set this to 2, you'll notice it's starting to hide all of the coins because everything's going up between either 0 to 2. If I put this to 1, I'm better off putting that to -1 so that some actually go down, and that means that I'm still able to see the coins a certain amount. And if I decide that this isn't broken up enough, I could always set this level to be 1 higher, and it's going to look a lot rougher. I'm going to bring that back to 2. Just for now. Again, I just want this rough surface so it looks like there's things underneath from a distance, but we can still see that there are these circular patterns. There are the coins in here, but you could go as high poly as you want. That's more than acceptable. It's going to look a little bit more random. Entirely up to you what you want to do with that. I'm going to put that to 0.5 if I did that so there's less pushing through the coins, I think. In fact, let's leave it as that for now. That's fine. And if you really wanted to, if I select that one and press Shift and D, I could duplicate this and do another subdivision surface. I'm going to put that as 1 just to make this a little bit smoother again. So you could easily do that, and you'll notice it's just making it not look. If I press Alt and drag that out, a little bit more harsh, a little bit less harsh. And I could set that crease to 0 if I wanted to, but again, you're going to have a slight rounding on the edge there, entirely up to you what you want to do. But I think that looks quite nice. It's got a lot of texture to it without it looking too extreme. Now, in a similar way to what I did earlier, I'm going to select all of those, press Ctrl and J, join them together, F2, and I'm going to call that sub D. So I've got that there. It's nice and easy to see what my different things are. I'm going to bring that down slightly. And again, if you want this, that is everything on your screen that I've done. So we do have an issue at the moment, and that big issue is that this is not going to 3D print. It's a plane with a load of coins on it. Now, as I said, this has got a lot of subdivisions on it. At this point, you're going to give your computer a heart attack if your computer's not pretty decent spec. So just be really, really aware of this. If you don't have a good spec computer, what you're going to want to do is just... I wonder if I can shade that smooth. I can shade that smooth. That looks a little bit nicer still. So, as I was saying, if you don't have a decent spec computer, I would get rid of this geometry node. I would get rid of this sub D option, or at least really bring down the subdivision, just because this next bit is going to make your computer do some work. So the first thing to do at this point is to actually save this. Like, this would be the point to do this, because otherwise when it goes wrong or your computer dies, you're going to have nothing to go from. And then we're going to apply it. So I'm going to click Apply All, and you'll notice all of my hard work has gone. And actually, that's just our own fault. We've missed something out that we need to put in. And if I bring up our geometry nodes, it should be here in our instancing. And the reason for this is, as we join our geometry together, essentially this is going to decide that these instances or these points have sort of disappeared, and we need to tell it that they haven't, that we're going to keep it. So we're going to press Shift and A, and we're going to type in realize, and we'll need to realize instances, and we're going to add that in there, and then we're just going to drag this into here so it recognizes that it's going into this, and then drag it back out again. There's probably a hotkey for that, I just don't know it. Now, once we've done that, if I click Apply All, and suddenly they're still there. Oh, what a relief. It wasn't all for nothing. So let's get this to the point where we can 3D print it. Don't need our geonodes now, but we are going to fix some bits. So the first thing I'm going to do is tab in here to Vertex mode, and I want to get rid of this coin. It's being in a place I don't want it. Press L, and that selects all of the linked vertices, and now I can just press G, and I'm going to move that to, let's just say there. So that one's out of the way. This one's a little bit close to the edge. Let's not do that. So select one of the points, press L, G, move it around, done. And we can use this to sort out any minor problems that we're going to have, or anything that we don't like the look of, just so it looks a little bit better on where things are. But the main ones to deal with are the ones that overlap on this outer edge. So we're pretty much fine for that. Now, the other thing for this to work is that we've currently got, if I come to Z, we've got this, and that's not going to be a straight edge at this point. So we're going to need to align these. So there's a few ways of doing this. I'm just going to use snapping and vertex, and I'm just going to press G and Y, and then snap to there, and then G and X, and then snap to there. So that's going to sort all of these out. So I'm just going to do that for each of my corners. So actually, it's not too much of an issue, really, if you use a subdivision surface, as long as your computer is going to be able to take it. Next, so if I come to this corner here, and I just press Alt, we're going to select that whole edge, and then I'm going to just do that for each one with Shift and Alt, selecting that one, then this one, then this one, and then just come into side view, and then I'll just press E to extrude them, Z to make sure it's going down. Just seeing that snapping's still on, so let's turn that off. And then I'm just going to press S for scale, Z to constrain it to the Z axis, and 0, and I've got these nice flat bottoms. Press F to fill it, and now we've got this object. And I will say this looks a little bit messy because of the shading, because it's on shade smooth. If I shade it flat, you can see this is a flat edge. Now we're going to separate everything out. If I go into vertex mode A and I press P, I can separate by loose parts. I've now got all of my different bits, and I can just select all of them and make sure that one's selected last. And then all I'm going to do is press Control and plus, and this is going to set a Boolean running, and it's going to join everything together. Now this is going to take a while. Okay, so that seems to have worked out fairly well. We've got all of this here, and if I have a look in, it does seem to have Boolean most of it. In fact, all of it really well. That was actually better than I was expecting. So that's actually probably the way that I'd go with this. You might have a few bits that you need to fix, but that's probably the way to go. And then we'll just click Apply All. So that was how to use geometry nodes to scatter objects onto a face. And what's useful about this, as you've seen, is that we can use it to apply more than one object in one pass, potentially saving a lot of time.